Hi guys, this is Mike and this is my Specialized Status 160, and since there's so little information about this bike out yet, I thought I'd do a quick review. I'm gonna go through my riding impressions, I'm gonna talk about the design and the kinematics of the rear suspension. My background is I'm a product designer. I've worked in the bike industry for about 15 years, not with mountain bikes though. And when it comes to riding, I've been riding BMX for 20 years or something like that, maybe more. And I'm also have a background in motocross. When it comes to actually mountain biking, I've been into it for maybe 3 years now. Got a bike park a couple of years ago, so I got super into mountain biking and ride as much as I can. So who is this bike designed for? Well, I guess we have to guess because Specialized doesn't even acknowledge the existence of this bike. It's not even on their homepage. But judging from how they market the bike, giving it to a lot of BMX riders and influence type dudes, also how it's designed, how burly it is, and how the kinematics is, which we're gonna look at later, and also the geometry of the bike. All those things combined, I would say it's pretty clear that they designed it for the kind of new school jib kind of freeride type rider. So going into the design of the bike, first of all, it's obviously a mullet setup with a 27.5 in the rear or 650B and a 29 in the front. To me, I always thought it looked a little bit weird in pictures, like the mullet setup in general. But I must say, now owning a mullet bike and having it in front of me, it doesn't look as weird in person as it does on pictures. When it comes to the frame design, it's very obvious that they took basically all the tubes from the old enduro, and I've also heard that the rear end is a direct fit from the 27.5 Specialized enduro. If that matters to you or not is up to you. To me it doesn't really matter, since they changed all the angles and geometry and also the kinematics and the linkage. I would say in general all the welding looks pretty decent and the finish is actually pretty nice. To me at least, the overall design looks pretty clean, maybe a little bulky and not super refined, but clean and simple. I should also say it's definitely not the lightest bike out. When you look at the kinematics of the bike, it's clear that they had descending in mind. It's not a super efficient pedaling platform or anything like that. I'm not going to talk too much about the geometry, since you can read that in a table somewhere, but one of the key features for me on this bike is the super short back end, and while it might make the bike a little bit more unbalanced or a little bit harder to get the weight on the front wheel, it's also, to me, the number that makes this bike so playful. Also, you can see that the pedal kickback is super low, which is great for descending. You won't feel any kickback on the pedals when you go through the travel. When it comes to the progressivity of the rear suspension, I would say it's not super progressive, but it's more progressive than a lot of other Specialized frames. I'm personally gonna try to ride a coil on this bike. Not sure yet if I'm gonna use a progressive coil or a normal coil. Depends a little bit on what kind of rider you are and how deep in the travel you want to sit, because as I said, it's progressive, but it's not super progressive. Okay, into the important stuff. How does it feel to ride this thing? Well, after running it for about a week, the first couple of days I rode it completely stock, and after that I started switching out parts. And also I should say that I rode it in high setting all the time. To me, the low setting is a little bit too low, a little bit too slack. I should say also that I will focus this review and the riding impressions on basically 100% descending for two reasons. One, I didn't pedal this bike a lot. I bought it to basically have as a jib bike. Also, I think the person that rides or buys this bike is more of the kind of park type guy. And also, not to mention that Specialized, in my opinion, designed it more for that type of rider. I will say that it pedals okay. I've not pedaled it a lot, but the pedaling I've done has been okay. It's a little bit wallowy, it's not super efficient, but it pedals okay. Can feel the weight quite a bit when you pedal though. The riding I've done so far has been mostly on dry, slippery conditions, mostly flow trail, but also a little bit of steeper rocky sections. Onto the fun stuff. How does it feel to ride? First of all, with the suspension, I feel the front end feels surprisingly good. I'm used to a more of a expensive front fork than this entry-level Fox, but I must say it feels good. It did its job, and I never once thought it performed bad or anything like that. When it comes to rear shock, it's wallowy. Like you can feel in the mid-strokes pumping a corner or pumping like a transition of a jump. It doesn't have that mid-stroke support you're looking for. When it comes to the rear end in general, it's really good at soaking up small bumps, I would say. It's very active in the rear. It's very compliant. When it comes to cornering and stuff like that, fear of having such a short back end with a long front end, I should say this is an S4, so it's pretty long in the front, is that it can push. This has not been a huge problem. I can feel it a little bit with the stock tires, which by the way are not good, but with the stock tires, which I rode it the first 5 days or something like that, I could feel it push a little bit. To me, it's not a huge concern. Since I have a motocross background, I'm used to putting pressure on the front end anyway, so for me it wasn't a big problem. But I could see some riders having a little bit of problem with that. Comparing it to my other bikes, I couldn't feel a huge difference when it comes to that. I definitely corner faster on my other bike, but it's fun to corner and it handles good. I'm used to a head-tube angle in the 65-degree range, and this has 63.7, so it felt like a wheelbarrow sitting on it. As soon as I rode it, I never thought once about the head-tube angle being a bad thing. If anything, for me, it felt super good going down the few steeper, rocky sections I rode with it. And in general, it's very confidence-inspiring going down those sections with such a slack head-tube angle. It does steer different in slow, tight corners though. You can see that it's kind of a handful to get around those tight corners and in slow speed when you can't kind of skid the back around. When it comes to jumping, this bike really shines. It's so fun to jump and so confidence-inspiring. It feels like you will never get bucked or anything like that. The whole kind of geometry and suspension works absolutely fantastic when it comes to jumping. Also, manuals will of course be easier with the short back end. I feel like this bike gives you a really large window to work with when jumping. Feels like you will not get bucked over the front or anything like that, and I think it's both the geometry where you can get a little bit further back and work around the bike with the mullet setup and the kinematics of the suspension and the setup. Also maybe the compliance of the frame, but it feels really good to jump this bike, to the point that there's a little jump on my trail that's really tricky. I don't really like jumping it on my other bike, but on this bike I jumped it first try and I jumped it the whole day, no problem. I never get bucked, never get squirrel in the air or anything like that. So I would say for someone that likes jumping, or even someone that has problems with jumping, I would say this bike is excellent for that. I will say though that on the Strava segment I tried, I was considerably slower on this bike than my full 29er carbon bike. So if that's your thing, maybe you should look at a full 29er or a different bike altogether. One benefit of the smaller rear end, aside from being able to move around in the air, it's considerably better at pumping. You can really feel how it gives you more speed than a 29er rear. So, pros and cons. I would say obviously the price is a huge pro. Getting a bike for this kind of price with the Specialized brand backing it is obviously amazing. The second pro is obviously how playful and fun this bike is to ride. I mean, if you're into playing around on the trail, jibbing, nose bonking, manualing, jumping, all that kind of stuff, I feel like this is the bike for you. Another pro is that there's really not that many bikes like this out there, especially at this price point of course, with this kind of short back end but still like a slack long front end. And I could maybe think about one or two bikes with this kind of geometry, but those are in a completely different price range. Another pro is obviously the rear end. I feel like it's really good when it comes to soaking up small bumps on the trail, but also progressive enough for big hits. And the final pro for me is the mullet setup. I didn't know if I would like the mullet setup, but riding it, I feel like it's really for me. I'm a tall guy, I'm 6'2" or something. Coming from BMX and I like to move around on the bike. I feel like the smaller rear wheel really enables you to work the bike in a completely different way. Obviously this could also be a con, since you will have to have two different tubes with you if you get a flat or rip a tire or something. Some people don't like the look of it, and I was one of those people before actually seeing it in person. When it comes to the cons, I will say that it's not the best pedaling platform. It's okay, but it's not great. The second con would be the rear suspension, or actually the shock, not the rear suspension, but the actual shock. It's a little bit wallowy for my taste. Another con is the tires that come fitted from the factory. They're just not good. They're too flimsy, they don't have enough grip. I would just change them as soon as you can, basically. Pick up some Maxis or Schwalbes or something. And the last con for me is that the bike is quite heavy coming from the factory. So the conclusion. Well, to me, I would say this is a bike for the guy or girl that likes to play around on the trail, likes jumping, and likes to have a fun bike. It's not for the rider that wants to beat Strava times and compete in enduro at a high level. Can it do that? Yeah, it can. For the right rider and for someone on a budget, it's still a very good enduro bike, I would guess, but it's not what it's designed for. There will be better options if that's what you're into. This bike could be someone's only bike if you're prepared to suffer a little bit going up to enjoy those descents. But I would say it's more for the rider that either lives for the park riding or actually have a different bike for those trail pedaling days. But for someone like me with a BMX background who likes to play around on the trail more than actually trying to go as fast as possible, I would say this is an ideal bike. I would say that's the kind of rider it was designed for. So, as you probably can tell, my bike has been upgraded quite a bit to be that jib bike. So if you want to see more of my bike and what I've done to it, I'm planning to do quite a build on this thing. You can check back on my channel from time to time, and maybe I'll do a bike check first, and then I do build videos as it progresses. Thanks for watching, cheers!